First, we're on the right track for a journey by rail in this week's edition of Home Ground.
Shortly before Christmas on BBC Two, you may have seen a series of very lavish television programmes called Great Railway Journeys of the World. Well, this is the one they forgot.
Platform 3A, 4924 to Stalybridge.
Yes, Stockport to Stalybridge. 7.5 miles, 20 minutes, and one of the great railway journeys through history. The northwest of England, I'm fond of saying, is an open-air industrial museum. Well, this line is the scenic route through that museum. Why, you even begin by setting off across Stockport Viaduct, one of the monuments of the railway age, the biggest brick-built bridge in the world. Well, now, with me is a man who travels this line every working day of his life, Jimmy Hill. Start off Stalybridge to Stockport and back every day.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And you don't just sit and read a book, you look out of the window.
Well, look out of the window and talk to people that I travel with and so on.
It is, of course, one of the great lines, isn't it?
Well, I think so, yeah. Then I'm a railway fan.
I mean, we start with what? The Viaduct here, which was built very early. I mean, not within 10 years.
1840.
Of the Liverpool-Manchester line opening.
Yeah.
Huge thing, about 111 feet above the Mersey. Built, I think, by a fellow called Buck.
He was the main architect, I believe, yeah. It cost about £50,000 or something.
It's the biggest single sort of feature of Stockport, isn't it?
Oh, I think so,
Mr.
yeah.
Lowry painted it, and I think Alan Lowndes certainly painted it. I mean, you can't imagine Stockport without it.
Well, you can't really. Man, it was it's 140, 150 years old thereabouts now, so it's been here a long time.
It has.
But it's quite a feature, really, and it's quite a piece of engineering, I suppose, really.
But you see, the great thing about this journey is that we will go through and you see, I mean, the whole history of the Northwest, because you see the mills and the dereliction and the mines and the canals and everything. This is really a trip through the industrial.
Well, it is, and it's a bit sad, really, to see it now compared to what it used to be. When I was a kid, it was much more, conditions weren't as good, but it was much more interesting and
much more active, wasn't it? Yes.
This is where the old station used to be, here,
yes.
The Heaton Norris station. I said they closed it in 1959. This is the old warehouse, London and Northwestern Railways. Yes. So in those days, there were 3 railways, you know.
All coming into Stockport?
Yeah, that's right. There was the London Northwestern, Great Central, and the Manchester routes, you know, coming up this way. This is Heaton Norris box on the other side here. That box was built about 1955, I think. It's electronic, of course, and it took the place of the old one.
And we start leaving the electric line,
this is the junction.
You get a
now.
tiny little bit of it, and then you move off.
Yeah, it ends here, the electric bit. And this is the old Heaton Norris junction through to Guybridge and then on to Stalybridge. This bridge here is going into where Jubilee sidings used to be.
Now these were famous, the Jubilee sidings, weren't they?
Oh yes, tremendously busy. Yes, it was. I can remember these when they lasted until the end of steam, of course. You know, and it was a great busy place. So trains queuing up.
Now it's got a little primary school, I see.
And it's now got a school on it.
Yes.
Of course, yeah. For somebody like me who's an enthusiast, of course, it's a bit of a come down, you know. But it used to be full of black fives and all sorts of things. This, you know.
I should think the little ones in the classroom enjoy looking out at the trains going past.
Well, yes, I suppose they do, although they don't get many past, I don't think, these days. Not
well, how often does this train go? Twice an hour?
It's about once an hour. About once every hour. Which, of course, is presumably sufficient service, you know. For the only thing that I'm sorry about as a railway enthusiast and a fan of British Rail is that more people don't use it. Yes. You know, I honestly can't understand why more people don't use this train from Stalybridge to Stockport, because, you know, for all its faults, it's better than bus.
Well, yes, it's faster than the bus, but it also has the great advantage that if you're coming up from the south and you want to go across to the northeast or east, if you want to go to Leeds, instead of going into Manchester and changing stations, you can hop off at Stockport, go to Stalybridge, and then pick up the
well,
main
of course,
line trains from there.
that's its function, you see. I mean, mainly, I think they don't bother much about people like me who just commute from Stalybridge to Stockport, because there aren't that many of us as far as this train is concerned.
What I would like to see British Rail do on this is to say, have it as a sort of trip, and say, why don't you take the train from Stockport to Stalybridge with a sort of guided tour along?
Oh, well, they don't do it, do they?
No,
you see?
but they should.
Well, I think so, too. They don't advertise.
And get the history. Now, we're going to be coming very shortly to the first stop along the line.
Reddish South, yeah. We're passing a place here, which again, being a bit nostalgic about it, is a bit sad, really. This used to be Craven Brothers, the works that we're going to pass now. Very big engineering works, of course. When I went to school, of course, it was one of the places where, if you wanted to get into engineering, this is where you went,
yeah.
you know. I know it was either Craven Brothers or Metrovics or Platts, you know, this sort of thing. And this works here was one of those places that they used to go to. And this is standard wagons, is where they repair wagons. You see
yes.
the pile of wheels and bits, and they take tanks off.
And here it is, first stop.
The van does a bit of the lamps again, I see.
Yeah.
And of course, you see this used to be two parts of the station. And I think, I'm not sure that before my time, but I think that in the older days, when they had joint running, London Northwestern went one side, Great Central went the other, you see. And there were two stations, you know, one there and one here.
Because it's difficult for people now to realise the kind of rivalry there was between the various train companies.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It was.
And the different liveries, you see, and things. I mean, trains coming in quite different colours because they belonged to different companies, rang on different lines.
Oh, yeah. They were different
it's a
stock.
shadow of itself, isn't it?
It's difficult, you see. I think the railway suffers from the inconvenience of people getting to the station, you see. I mean, it's so much more convenient on the bus. I'm prepared to sort of walk down from home to the station every morning and so on, you know.
Now, this is a bonny bit.
This is Reddish Vale. It's spoiled now, the view of it, by these wagons on the side here. They've been there years. They were waiting for somebody to mend them or to scrap them, one of the two. But Reddish Vale is very interesting. It's a beautiful little bit of country. It's about the only bit there is. And that line that runs along there is, you can go along there, it's the main line to...
Because Frank's been having a look along there.
Has he? Yeah.
This used to be a very busy country lane, echoing the clatter of workers' clogs and the rumble of horse-drawn carts. For here at the end of it, for well over 150 years, they printed calico cloth at the Reddish Vale mill. But it's a mill no longer, more an embarrassment to its new owners, Greater Manchester Council. For like many another old cotton mill in these parts, it's obsolete and dropping to bits. One or two corners have been put to new uses, but most of it's filled with rubbish and rubble and the echoes of that dark, satanic past. There are two reasons why cotton mills came to Reddish Vale in the early days of the Industrial Revolution. The River Tame, which turned the wheels, which powered the machinery, and the perpetually damp climate, which prevented cotton threads from drying and snapping. Eventually, of course, coal provided the power, and that too was close by. The pit's no longer there, but what remains of the old pit heap a mile or so up the valley still smokes malevolently from time to time. Calico printing, at the finishing end of the cotton process, was one of the great skills of the Stockport area. And in those days, the Reddish Vale mill must have been a pretty wet, noisy, unhealthy place to work, clattering and steaming from knocker up to bedtime 6 days a week. Due to failures and bankruptcies, it's had quite an assortment of owners in its time. One of the most colourful, a female chauvinist named Miss Lydia Becker. She lived here in the early 1800s, and legend has it that she was so keen on women's rights that she ran the mill entirely with women workers. Its heyday was the early part of this century, when 330 people worked here, bleaching, printing, dyeing and finishing cloth, mainly for export to Africa, America and the Far East. Apart from faded signs, broken gates and windows and a lot of dereliction, there's nothing much left, except an enormous dilemma for the council. Should they spend money making the old mill safe and habitable in the hope that some other industry will be attracted to it, or should they abandon this large and nostalgic chunk of industrial archaeology? Up on the hill, there's a crowd of people, some of them must have worked at the mill at one time or another, who are totally indifferent to the problem. Willow Grove Cemetery once occupied the only patch of ground around here that was not crowded with mills and smoking chimneys, and its headstones span generations of clogs, shawls and trouble at the mill. One of them marks the grave of a man who tried to improve working class conditions and went to prison for his pains. William Henry Chadwick was a Stockport mill worker who joined the Chartists, the revolutionary democratic agitation of the mid-19th century, and became one of their local leaders. A particular campaign in which he was prominent was the 10% movement of 1853, when the workers approached the local mill owners, cloth caps in hand, and respectfully asked them to restore a 10% cut in wages imposed 5 years earlier during a cotton recession. It was the way of things for the old mill owners to reject that kind of request, and Chadwick led a strike. The strikers got their money, only to lose it again 12 months later when the cotton trade once more hit hard times. Hard times indeed, and hard men. And a few brave souls like William Henry Chadwick.
Spoiling it in this end because of this great monstrosity they're building across here. You know, they've torn the heart out of Hyde and Denton and so on to get the motor cars from Otten to Manchester.
Yeah.
Ridiculous, you know. But, I mean, it goes
I think you're a
nowhere.
bit biased on that, mate.
Well, I am, yeah, but I mean, it goes nowhere, you know. Well, it goes to Mottram, and then what do? You've got to get over the hills there, you know. You have to get up it and go over the hills.
Oh, this is Denton, you think, isn't it? I mean, this is where the Hatters were. This was the headquarters of the Hatters business.
It's the centre of the Hatters. I believe one works left now. I don't know for sure, but I think so.
They used to bring all the fur, you know, from London by train for the Hatters to work on, to make the hats.
Oh, I can imagine that, yes. I mean,
and they say, the story always is, I don't think it's true, but they always say that, you know, the Mad Hatter was mad because of the mercury they used to cure the fur. And it was mercury poisoning that made all the Hatters mad. It was a great industrial disease in these parts.
There's a set of traps here, catch points, you know, to stop the train from running back if it breaks. Or I've never actually seen them used. I don't know whether they ever have been. We've just gone, that's it. We've just gone over. You heard the click.
But now we're coming, you see, to Guide Bridge. We're really coming to a major railway.
Oh, we're coming to a Junction first before we get to Guide Bridge. We're just coming to it now, where the signals are. This is where the railway splits into three. And the one that goes off to the right, which is closed now, used to be another route which belonged to London Northwestern before grouping. Yes. I'm talking about pre-1923, it's before my time. But I can remember this because when I first started coming to work on the train, that's the way I used to come from Stalybridge. We didn't come through Guide Bridge then, we came back through another route.
And through Denton Junction here,
and into the Junction here. There's the signal box. You see the Planet Foundry, all fallen to pieces, can you see?
Yeah.
Terrible mess, isn't it?
Yeah.
No. It's a shame, really.
It is.
This is where the Junction used to go off, up there. You see, all the tracks have gone.
Where did the other line go, the one that swung off to the left?
That one goes off to Oldham, or did go off to Oldham eventually, through the Oldham, Ashton and Guide Bridge Junction, which is gone.
Don't they go that way on Sundays?
They freight trains use it,
Bridge.
and they can use it as a diversion. I've been round there on the odd occasion when perhaps there's been something wrong with Guide Bridge or something. It goes round by the Ashton National, where Ashton National used to be. But you used to be able to travel from Oldham to Stockport on the train, up to the 1960s, beginning of the 1960s. But that's gone. You try and get from Oldham to Stockport on a bus.
You know? I don't think you like buses.
Well, you know, I mean, let's have a bit of publicity for British Rail, why not? No, they deserve it.
Ah, well, this is the lovely bit.
Oh, well, of course, there again, you see the dereliction. There used to be a very busy yard here, coal, and the old poor old goods shed falling apart, you know, London Northwestern. London Northeastern. And this, we're on to another bit of electrification now, which is the the Woodhead line, which
Yes.
they're going to shut, I believe.
Yeah.
You know.
Now this was the historic one. I mean, this was the first
Guidebridge.
electric mainline service,
beg your
wasn't it?
pardon, yes.
Yes.
Yes, this was originally started pre-war, about 1937 or 38.
Guidebridge, Guidebridge, Guidebridge.
Of course, Guidebridge is almost a railway museum in itself, and here to meet me is David Sumner, whom we last met when I think we were talking about Liverpool Road and what was going to happen to the station there. That's a few months back. But this one's really a working museum. I mean, this is ideal. This is a station still busy and yet still very historical.
Well, of course, before the Stockport and Stalybridge railway line opened, it was opened first in 1841 for the Sheffield, Ashton and Manchester Railway. And this railway, of course, was projected from Manchester across to Sheffield, opened in 45 as a proper railway all the way through Woodhead Tunnel, and of course Guidebridge was one of the first stopping places across.
Do you think it was just an accident, though, that it became a major junction?
Well, Guidebridge really is in between Ashton, Duckingfield, Denton, Stalybridge. It was called Hooley Hill, in fact. It was called Ashton and Hooley Hill, the station, until 1845.
And then what's going to happen now? They're going to close the bit, aren't they, through Woodhead, which is really the main line here?
Yes, I think on the last day in May this year, they're going to close down the old freight route across Great Central Railway line across the Woodhead, through Woodhead Tunnel, and then, of course, the coal will have to come from somewhere else.
That's them changing signals, isn't it? Moving the
Changing points,
Makes
yes.
a marvellous
Yeah,
sound,
yeah.
indeed. Because it's one of those places which is more famous really as a railway station than as a place, if you know what I mean.
Oh well, yeah. There's no such place as Guidebridge. It's just the name of the station, and it was a junction. In fact, I was looking at an old map recently, and there were 10 junctions at Guidebridge, 10 different junctions, you know, for the various little railways that used to join in. You know, like a stretch from here to
But
there.
it's actually called Ashton Junction, I think.
Ashton Junction, yeah. But you see, there's another one further back which we go past, which is called Ashton, Oldham and Guidebridge Junction. And that was where the lines used to join on, you know, but that's at the other side. But that box has been shut for quite a long time. This is a stabling point for the locomotives, for the freight traffic that they use now.
Now it's the divide here. Now which goes? That goes to.
That is the main line up to, well, obviously it goes up to Sheffield eventually.
Through Woodhead.
Through Woodhead, yeah. This is our junction off to Stalybridge.
Yes.
And the yard on the left was always a busy freight yard at one time. It now belongs to the engineering section, I believe. You see they've got all the tracks and so on the wagons. The big goods yard as it is now is up at the other side there, Dog Lane it's called, and that's at the other side, Juiced-up siding. But that's not on the Stockport side, it's on the other side.
And we get our first glimpse of the canals.
The canal runs parallel along here.
You see, I think that of all the bit of the track, this is the most interesting. As you come just here, it seems to me, you see the whole of what it has to offer. You've got the feeling of,
Tremendous lot of
the
industry.
railways, the canals, the churches, the mills, and sadly, of course, the dereliction too. But if we look at the basin carefully, you'll see what a lovely job they've made, and indeed Frank Mellor's there now.
Not exactly Venice by moonlight, though the bridge has a certain style. It's Ashton-Under-Lyne in broad daylight, and the Portland Basin, hard by the railway and the River Tame, is in fact the confluence of 3 canals, the Ashton, the Macclesfield and Peak Forest and the Huddersfield Narrow. A spot dear to the heart of Dr. David Owen, author of 6 books on canals and an enthusiast. These were 3 canals the coming of the railway didn't put out of business, rather strangely.
I think the reason for this is twofold. The first is that these 2 canals, the Ashton and the Peak Forest, were taken over by a railway which was to become the Great Central, whereas this was London Northwestern country. So the Great Central was able to get into somebody else's territory by owning canals. The other thing, I think, was the sort of thing that they carried. The Ashton was very much a coal-carrying canal, ideal for boats and slow movement and so forth, and the Peak Forest here was a stone canal, the great limestone quarries of Dove Holes, and again, it's an ideal sort of thing for canals to carry.
And this must have been a very busy, thriving little junction.
It was enormously busy in its time. After all, boats came from this way, from the Peak Forest and round and down into Manchester, and boats came over the top from the Huddersfield Narrow, which is away behind us here, and from Yorkshire. That originally was intended to link the two sides of the country, although it was very hard going. There was a huge tunnel up at the top which took a long time to leg through.
And very obviously the mills were built along the canal banks for a very good reason.
You find this all over the place. You find that the mills dot the canals. And when you think about it, there are 2 or 3 things that were enormous advantages for them. First of all, their coal, they were mostly coal-driven engines, could be brought straight to their bunkers. Secondly, the canal water is very, very pure, and it could be used for their boilers. And then, of course, thirdly, their cotton mills mostly around here, or many of them are, and the raw cotton could come up from Liverpool, and finished goods go back the same way. So it was everything for the mills, and the mills went on being built beside canals right to the end of the 19th century.
So if it wasn't the railway which finally put the canals out of business, what was it?
Oh, it was the internal combustion engine, and the fact that both railways and canals could carry from one point to another, whereas the roads and the vehicle transport could carry from door to door. So that enormous advantage was such that it hit the canals more quickly than the railways, but of course it hit them both.
And was it a slow rundown as far as these 3 canals were concerned, or did it all happen overnight?
It happened fairly quickly. Up to the end of the 19th century, they were all carrying approximately as much as they'd carried in pre-railway days. Well, then we find in the 20th century, when the lorries were starting, the amounts carried were getting less and less. Well, then, of course, there was the First War. This was a bit of a boost for canals. They struggled on between the wars, and then there was a tiny boost to the Second War, but hardly anything at all, and then absolutely cut off dead.
Of course, this junction here is part of the Cheshire Ring, and when we're talking about leisure, that's very important, isn't it?
That's perfectly true. Yes, this lovely ring of 100 miles of canals is one that's very much used today. And I think it's an interesting thing, you know, to remember that Westall, writing in 1908, said that the Great Central Railway Company that owned these canals was particularly interested in pleasure traffic. And in fact, it was only a nominal toll on their 3 canals, the Ashton, the Peak Forest and the Macclesfield up at the top, and that you could travel the whole 43, 44 miles for only 8 shillings, 40 pence as it would be today. Very, very much less.
It was in fact a passenger canal there.
Yes, well, of course it was a passenger canal in that respect, but if we go 100 years earlier still, when roads were so bad and the coaches were so uncomfortable in the winter, there were packet boats on this canal. You could travel daily from Manchester up to here, on up to Ashton or Stalybridge. You could travel from Manchester through to Stockport, or you could turn up this, under this bridge here, and go on away up to Hyde. The boats themselves had 2 classes, just as railways were to have 3. There was the front of the boat, which I think was 1 6 return from Manchester up to Ashton, and the back of the boat, far less comfortable, and of course you couldn't see out for the view, which was only 8p return.
Now where are we?
Well, we're now going across the viaduct where the station used to be, Ashton Park Parade. There's an interesting bit about this viaduct, actually. When it was first built in 1845, when they were taking the railway from Stalybridge to Guybridge, they'd just finished it, they were just putting the tracks down, and 9 of the arches fell down, and there were, I think, there were 12 men killed. It was quite a thing, you know. The bit about the Illustrated London News, I believe.
But that's sad, you see, isn't it? Just mounds of cars.
Oh yeah, well, it's a bit. I mean, I
some
suppose
pigs there in the middle.
Yeah, there's piggeries. There always have been piggeries down this end here, the river. There used to be factories there, cotton mills there.
You see, look at the dereliction by the river.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah, it's terrible. I think what they ought now to try and do to add to this country park thing is clean the river up. You know, it'd be a lot better to do it.
Down by the once poisonous River Tame, the thrushes are singing, the grass is rising. A truly remarkable transformation scene brought about by a group of local councils and a few dedicated people like the warden, Chris Bowen. Chris, I can still see the froth on the river, but was it a lot worse than this 10 years ago?
Oh yeah, yes Frank, it was. The massive banks of froth blowing about on here. It had its bad days and its good days. It depended on just which firms were tipping what effluent into the river at the time.
And what about the area itself? I mean, an awful lot of grass seed must have been scattered around, a lot of footpaths made.
Yes, that's right. There are miles, literally miles of footpaths made.
How much does it cost, for instance, to make a footpath like that?
Well, something like that, you're talking about £6 a metre. It's a terribly expensive business.
And a few tons of grass seed. You don't call it grass seed, do you? You call it something else?
Well, we have a conservation mix which has lots of wild plants in it, wild flowers. And it's sort of instant conservation. You throw this about and up it comes.
Apart from the people who just come out for a stroll, do you get many organised parties doing organised things?
Oh yeah. Yeah, in the summer months we run guided walks, and to a lesser extent in the winter too. But in the summer we tend to take people for a guided walk and point out anything of interest, industrial archaeology, flowers, for example. I understand there are 350 different species of flower in the Tame Valley.
I suppose that there are some adventure courses too, are there?
There certainly are, the adventure walks, yeah, where we have canoes on the canal and we abseil off aqueducts, or we have a 50-foot cliff too that we abseil from.
All confined to children and youngsters, I imagine?
Well, no, certainly not. We had men of over 70 abseiling off this 50-foot cliff, and old grannies floating about in slalom canoes.
But this, of course, is Stalybridge. We're now in Stalybridge, the old industrial part of Stalybridge. As we're going up here now, we'll join in to the line that comes from Liverpool, Manchester, that way. That's the main line.
Because it used to be, of course, a very busy station indeed.
Oh, yes. I was reading somewhere that in 1866, it said, there were about 200 trains a day through Stalybridge. It's going something, don't it?
Well, I can't show you any film from 1866, but I can show you a piece of film that goes back to about 1927. You see what it was like then.
Well, I was 2 then. I was 2.
Fine. How are you doing? Fine, thanks very much. There you are, we made it. Journey's end, 21 minutes, Stockport to Stalybridge. A journey people have been doing for 141 years. It may not be exciting, as our film we showed you of the 1920s, but there is still one relic of those good days. I'll show you. A station buffet as warm and friendly as a Victorian pub, and the licensee is Dorothy Redfern. Have a pint of bitter, love.
Oh, certainly.
It's a pub, isn't it? I mean, in the sense that the ordinary public can come in. You don't have to buy a platform ticket.
Not at all, no. It's a free open station. What do I put you there in?
I'll have the straight glass.
Okay.
Do you? But what happens if I'm a traveller rushing for a train and it's full of the locals?
Well, if you're a traveller rushing for a train, are you rushing for a train now?
Yes.
Oh, well, it's a sort of immediate action, bums away, and you get your beer quickly. If you were a local sitting in here, you would be excused and have to sit quietly while all the customers were served first.
And that's a kind of rule of the house, is it?
That is the rule of the house.
Well, how long have you had it?
Coming up 30.
42.
That's
How many?
13 years coming
13
up.
years.
Mm.
Well, are you open just pub hours or all times? Cheers.
We open full pub hours, but by and large we open a little bit earlier in the morning. Sort of teas and coffees, that sort of thing.
Dorothy, thank you very much indeed. So there you are, there it is. One of the most fascinating railway lines in the world, Stockport to Stalybridge. You should bring the children for a trip with your not on this, mind. But whether you get on to Stockport or Stalybridge, try it both ways. Good night.